for 6 whole months. Every weekday, a man would show up at the Vanguard Tech Garden at precisely 7 in the morning. He was stout, grubby, and smelled awful, pushing a rusty shopping cart loaded with plastic bags and empty bottles. The security guards let him in because he cared for the plants with a devotion no professional gardener could match. And when the board of directors finally discovered who he really was, the entire company was shaken by a seismic shift that forever changed how thousands of employees viewed their work. If you've ever wondered if the people around you are truly who they claim to be, or if you've felt judged by your appearance without anyone knowing the truth about you, this story will leave you breathless. Because what happened in that 17-story mirrored building in downtown São Paulo wasn't just a shocking revelation. It was a brutal lesson in empathy, prejudice, and the price we pay when we forget that every human being has a story. Before I continue this story, I wanted to ask you for something simple. If you enjoy hearing real stories that touch your heart and make us reflect on life, subscribe here to the channel. Every week we bring stories like this about people who have gone through situations that you yourself might be experiencing right now. Your subscription helps me continue bringing these stories, and I promise each one will be worth your time. Vanguard occupied an imposing glass tower on Paulista Avenue, all tinted glass, with an internal garden that looked more like a miniature rainforest. There were royal palms, giant ferns, rare orchids hanging from tree trunks, and an artificial pond with Japanese koi lazily swimming among volcanic rocks. That garden was the company's pride, the first thing clients and investors saw upon entering the triple-height lobby. But in recent months, the plants were dying. Leaves were yellowing, flowers were wilting, and the pond water had taken on a murky green hue. The landscaping company they'd hired sent technicians every week, but nothing seemed to work. It was on a Monday morning, March 12th, that the man first appeared. Marcos, the morning shift security guard, was having his coffee when he saw the figure cross the main gate. He was short, very overweight, wearing worn-out sweatpants, a white t-shirt with yellowish old sweat stains, and a faded baseball cap that hid part of his face. His sneakers were so beat up that the soles were peeling off with every step, making a strange sound against the marble floor. The smell arrived before him, a mix of stale sweat, urine, and something Marcos couldn't quite identify, but it made his stomach turn. The man was pushing a shopping cart full of black plastic bags, crushed PET bottles, folded cardboard, and an old backpack that looked like it was about to fall apart. Marcos immediately stood up, his hand instinctively going to the radio on his belt. "Hey, you can't be here," Marcos said, his voice firm but not aggressive. The man stopped, slowly turned his face towards the guard, and Marcos saw his eyes. They were deep brown eyes with an expression so tired and yet so lucid that for a moment Marcos felt uncomfortable, as if that gaze could read his soul. "I know," the man replied, his voice surprisingly clear and polite. "I won't stay. I just wanted to take care of the plants for a bit. They're dying. If you give me 20 minutes, I promise I'll leave without making a mess." Marcos hesitated. There was something in that request that sounded sincere, almost desperate. He looked at the garden, at the yellowing leaves of the palms, at the lifeless orchids hanging down, and then looked back at the man. 20 minutes, Marcos said, crossing his arms. "And don't touch anything but the plants." The man nodded, parked the cart beside the guardhouse, and entered the garden with a worn-out cloth bag he took from his backpack. For the next 20 minutes, Marcos watched him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. The man moved among the plants with an impressive delicacy for someone his size. He would kneel beside each pot, examine the leaves with his dirty but careful fingers, remove dead leaves, adjust the soil, and whisper things Marcos couldn't hear. At one point, he took out a plastic bottle cut in half, filled with something that looked like homemade fertilizer, and began watering some specific plants. When the 20 minutes were up, the man stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked back to the guardhouse. "Thank you," he said, picking up the cart. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Marcos, not quite understanding why he was saying it, replied, "You can, same time." And so began a routine that would last 6 months. Every morning at 7 sharp, the man would appear. He was never late, never missed a day, and never stayed more than 30 minutes. Little by little, the garden began to change. The leaves regained their vibrant green, flowers bloomed again, the pond water cleared, and the koi started swimming with renewed energy. Employees arriving early began to notice. Some would stop to watch the man work, others would make nasty comments amongst themselves. "Gross, they let a dirty homeless guy mess with the plants," commented Bruna from marketing one morning, passing the lobby with a group of colleagues. "Seriously, it's unsanitary. He should be in a shelter, not here," agreed Raphael, a finance intern, covering his nose with his hand. But there were also those who observed in silence. There was Sonia, the 62-year-old woman who worked cleaning the 3rd floor. She always arrived at 6:30 and would watch the man work through the lobby glass. She never said anything, but every week she'd discreetly leave a package of cookies wrapped in aluminum foil on top of his cart when he wasn't looking. There was Kaio, a systems analyst from the 10th floor, who sometimes stopped by the garden and asked the name of a plant. The man would always answer patiently, explaining the scientific name, the necessary care, the species' origin, all with a wealth of detail that impressed Kaio. "Did you study botany?" Kaio asked one day. The man smiled slightly and replied, "I learned it on the street." What no one knew was that this man, whom everyone simply called the Garden Bum, was actually Henrique Almeida Campos, 54 years old, founder and CEO of Vanguard. Henrique had started the company 22 years ago in his parents' garage with an idea that was simple but revolutionary at the time, a platform connecting small businesses to local suppliers. Vanguard grew, became a tech giant, went public, and Henrique became one of the most respected entrepreneurs in Brazil. But for the past 5 years, something inside him had begun to die. The endless meetings, the financial reports, the board pressures, the power plays. Everything that had once energized him now suffocated him. He had lost touch with the essence of the company, with the people who made everything tick with his own life. 6 months ago, after a severe anxiety attack landed him in the hospital, Henrique made a radical decision. He announced to the board that he was taking a 6-month medical leave, appointed Clara Mendes, his VP of Operations as interim CEO, and simply vanished. But Henrique didn't go to a luxury rehab clinic, didn't travel to a spiritual retreat in India, didn't lock himself away on an isolated farm. He wanted to understand something that was tormenting him. Who were the people working for him? How did they really feel? What did they think when they believed no one important was looking? Henrique knew that if he showed up as CEO, everyone would put on a mask. Everyone would say what he wanted to hear. Everyone would be an edited version of themselves. So he decided to become invisible. He bought old clothes at a street thrift store, stopped shaving, let his hair grow out, intentionally gained 20 pounds eating junk food, and started living on the streets around the Vanguard building. During the day, he observed. At night, he slept on park benches or in shelters, and every morning, precisely at 7, he went to the garden he himself had designed 20 years ago, when the company still fit on a single floor of some ordinary office building. Folks, you have no idea what Henrique discovered in those 6 months. He saw things that broke his heart and opened his eyes in a way no management consultant, no employee climate survey, no satisfaction poll ever could. He saw how the high-ranking employees treated the cleaning staff like they were furniture, invisible, disposable. He saw managers yelling at interns in the hallways, publicly humiliating 20-somethings who made silly mistakes. He saw the company cafeteria serving quality food to the executives on the 17th floor and reheated leftovers to the maintenance crew in the basement. He saw, with his own eyes, the chasm that existed between the company's pretty rhetoric of human value and the stark reality of daily life. But he also saw beauty. He saw Sonia sharing her lunch with a colleague who had forgotten hers. He saw Kaio teaching coding for free to the doorman's son. He saw groups of employees pooling money to help a colleague who had lost his house in a flood. And he saw, above all, how people treated him. As a beggar, Enrique was invisible to most, but to some he was an annoyance. One morning, Lucas, the sales manager, walked past him in the garden and spat on the ground near Enrique's feet. "Disgusting, man! Get a job instead of stinking up the place," Lucas said, adjusting his expensive tie as he entered the building. On another occasion, Fernanda, the HR director, asked Marcos to take care of that filthy bum before any important clients see him. Marcos, who had developed a strange friendship with the man during those months, replied that he wasn't doing anything wrong. Fernanda retorted sharply, "I don't care. This isn't a homeless shelter. Get him out of here." But Marcos didn't, and Enrique kept coming back. He jotted everything down in a worn-out notebook he hid in his backpack. Names, situations, words, behaviors. He was building an emotional map of his own company, seeing the true soul of the place he had created. Until September 10th arrived, Enrique had marked it on his personal calendar, hidden on the last page of his notebook. It was the day his leave ended. It was the day he would return. But this time, he wouldn't return as the polished, distant CEO who had left 6 months ago. He would return with a mission. That morning, as always, Enrique appeared at 7 sharp. But this time, he carried a battered travel bag next to his cart. Marcos noticed and frowned. "Going on a trip?" Marcos asked. Enrique smiled, a sad smile but full of determination. "Sort of. Today's my last day like this." Marcos nodded, not quite understanding. Enrique entered the garden, but this time he didn't tend to the plants. He just sat on a stone bench by the lake and watched the water, the fish, the plants he had saved from dying. At 8:30 in the morning, as the lobby began to fill with employees arriving for work, Enrique stood up, grabbed his bag, left the cart by the guardhouse as he always did, and walked towards the elevator. Several people looked at him with disgust and moved away as he passed. Someone whispered, "How absurd! Now bums are coming inside the building." Enrique pressed the button for the 17th floor. When the doors opened, he was face to face with the corridor leading to the executive suite. The secretary, Julia, looked up from her computer and almost screamed when she saw the dirty, foul-smelling figure standing at the reception desk. "Sir, you can't be here. I'm calling security," Julia said, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone. Enrique slowly took off his cap. Julia froze. Her eyes widened so much they looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. The color drained from her face. "Mr. Enrique," she whispered, her voice breaking. Enrique nodded. "Hi, Julia. Been a while, huh? Sorry for the shock. Can you let Clara know I'm here? And ask her to gather the entire board and all the directors in the conference room in 30 minutes. Everyone. No exceptions." Julia couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes filled with tears of shock. Enrique went into the private bathroom of the executive suite, took a long shower, shaved, cut his hair with clippers he had brought in his bag, and put on a simple but impeccable suit that was also inside. When he emerged 30 minutes later, he was still a few pounds overweight, his face a little more aged, but he was unmistakably Enrique Almeida Campos. He walked to the conference room. Everyone was already there. Clara, the 12 board members, the 8 directors, all seated around the enormous glass table. When Enrique opened the door, the silence was so profound you could hear everyone in the room breathing. Clara stood up slowly, her hands trembling. "Enrique," she said, her voice choked. "Are you okay?" Enrique smiled. "I'm great, Clara. Better than I've been in years. Thanks for holding down the fort while I was gone." He sat at the head of the table and scanned the room. Some stared with relief, others with confusion, and some with what looked like fear. "I know you have a million questions," Enrique began, "and I'll answer them all. But first, I need to tell you where I've been for the past 6 months. And then Enrique told them. He told them he'd been living on the streets. He told them he'd disguised himself as a homeless man. He told them he'd observed the company from the inside, but from an angle no CEO had ever seen. He told them about the garden, about Marcos, about Sonia, about Caio. He told them about Lucas spitting near him. He told them about Fernanda asking to have him thrown out. He told them about the humiliations he witnessed, about the arrogance, about the chasm between what the company claimed to be and what it truly was. The room was in absolute shock. Fernanda, the HR director who had asked to have him removed from the building, was as white as a sheet, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Lucas, the manager who had spit, had lowered his head and couldn't look at Enrique. If this story is hitting you, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. Here, we tell real stories of people who faced the impossible, and I'm sure many of them will make you feel less alone on your journey. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a situation where you felt people around you showed their true colors when they thought no one important was watching? Have you noticed how differently we treat those with power versus those without? Write, "I've been there" below if this story touched you in any way. Your comment might be exactly the message someone else needed to read today to know they aren't alone. Enrique continued. "I didn't do this to catch anyone," he said, his voice firm but not aggressive. "I did it because I was lost, because I had built a company that on paper was perfect, beautiful values, inspiring mission, bold vision, but I no longer knew who the people were who truly made it all work. And now I do." He opened his worn notebook and began to read. He read about Sonia, who earned minimum wage and still shared her food with colleagues. He read about Caio, who used his free time to teach. He read about Marcos, who treated a homeless man with dignity when it would have been easier to just kick him out. And then he read about Lucas, about Fernanda, about other managers and directors who had shown contempt, arrogance, and cruelty. "I'm going to make changes," Enrique announced. "Profound changes. Starting today, every executive in this company, including myself, will spend 1 week a year working in entry-level positions, cleaning, maintenance, security, cafeteria, without advance notice, no special treatment. And every semester we'll have real 360-degree performance reviews where frontline employees can evaluate their superiors anonymously and without fear of retaliation." He paused, looking directly at Fernanda and Lucas. "And there's more. Any executive or manager caught humiliating, disrespecting, or treating any employee as inferior will be fired on the spot. It doesn't matter their position, it doesn't matter the results they bring. Because I learned something in these 6 months. A company is only as good as how it treats people when it thinks no one is looking." The room was in deathly silence. Fernanda had tears streaming down her face. Lucas had his hands on the table, visibly trembling. Clara, the interim CEO, was the first to speak. "Henrique, I think what you did was brave and necessary."
"And I agree with every word you said. I'm with you." One by one, others began to agree. But Enrique raised his hand. "I don't want you to agree just because you're scared or because you think it's politically correct. I want you to understand that this is not a marketing campaign. This is about changing the soul of this company. And if anyone here thinks they can't be a part of this..."
"You can leave now. No hard feelings." No one stood up, but Fernanda raised her hand, trembling. "Henrique, I want to apologize," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know. I never thought. I only saw numbers, targets, processes. I forgot we're talking about people." Henrique looked at her for a long moment. "Fernanda, you are one of the best HR professionals I know. But being technically good isn't enough if you lack empathy. You'll have a second chance, but you'll need to prove you've changed. For real." Fernanda nodded, wiping her tears. Lucas also asked to speak. "I have no excuse," he said, his voice low. "What I did was disgusting. I deserve to be fired." Enrique took a deep breath. "Lucas, I could fire you right now, but I won't, because firing you would be easy for me and wouldn't change anything in you. So you're going to do it differently. You'll apologize personally to everyone you've humiliated or disrespected over the years, not by email, face to face. And you'll spend the next 3 months working with the cleaning crew for real, earning their salary. If you want to continue after that, we'll talk." Lucas swallowed hard but nodded. The meeting continued for another 2 hours. Henrique presented a detailed plan for cultural transformation, creation of an ethics committee with real power, salary increases for frontline positions, a reverse mentorship program where executives would learn from lower-level employees, total transparency regarding bonuses and salaries, and, perhaps the most radical decision, that 10% of the company's profit would be distributed equally among all employees, regardless of their position. When the meeting ended, Henrique asked to speak with Clara alone. They went to his office, the office he hadn't seen in 6 months. Everything was exactly as he had left it. The mahogany desk, the leather armchairs, the panoramic view of São Paulo. But everything seemed different now, smaller, less important. "You were incredible these past 6 months, Clara," Enrique said. "The company grew, the numbers improved. You did a job I don't know if I could have done." Clara smiled faintly. "Thank you, but I missed you, the team missed you, and I think the company needs you back." Enrique shook his head. "I'll be back, but not as I was before. I no longer want to be the CEO who lives locked on this floor, who only talks to shareholders and board members. I want to be down there, in the garden, in the hallways, in the cafeteria. I want to know the name of every single person who works here. I want them to know I care." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then do it, and I'll be right there with you." That afternoon, Henry walked down to the ground floor. The garden was beautiful, the plants lush, the pond crystal clear. Mark was at the guardhouse as usual. When he saw Henry approaching in a suit, his face clean-shaven, Mark slowly stood up, his mouth agape. "It was you," Mark said, his voice a mix of surprise and something akin to awe. "All along, it was you." Henry smiled and extended his hand. "It was me. And thank you, Mark. Thank you for letting me stay. Thank you for treating me with respect when everyone else saw me as dirt." Mark shook his hand, his eyes welling up. "You weren't dirt. You never were. Anyone with eyes to see knew that." They stood there in silence, looking out at the garden. Then Henry asked, "Do you think people can truly change, Mark?" Mark thought for a moment. "I think some can, if they want to, if they have a strong enough reason." Henry nodded. Then let's see if I can give them that reason. In the following months, Vanguard underwent a transformation that became a case study in business schools across the country. Henry kept every promise he had made. Executives started working in entry-level roles. The first few weeks were awkward. Some complained, some quit, but many discovered a connection to the company they hadn't realized was missing. 360-degree feedback surveys revealed structural problems that no external consultant had ever identified. Abusive managers were fired, empathetic leaders were promoted. The organizational climate, measured by an external, anonymous survey, rose from 54% satisfaction to 89% in 1 year. Turnover was cut in half, productivity increased by 30%, and Vanguard, for the first time in its history, was named one of the best companies to work for in America. But the most important thing for Henry wasn't in the numbers, it was in the small, everyday moments. It was seeing executives genuinely talking with the cleaning staff. It was seeing the cafeteria serving the same quality food to everyone. It was seeing Sonia promoted to cleaning supervisor with a 40% raise after several employees wrote letters praising her work and generosity. It was seeing Kaio create a digital inclusion program teaching coding to the children of employees from all departments. It was seeing Lucas, after 3 months as a janitorial assistant, return to sales, but completely transformed. More humble, more empathetic, more human. Henry never again spent an entire day locked away on the 17th floor. Every morning, before starting his workday, he went to the garden, sometimes to water plants, sometimes just to sit and observe, and sometimes, when he saw an employee rushing by, stressed, overwhelmed, he'd stop them and ask, "Hey, are you okay? Need anything?" And people, initially wary, gradually began to respond honestly, to open up, to trust. A year after that September 10th, Vanguard held a company anniversary party. Henry walked onto the stage to give a speech, but before he said anything, he asked 3 people to join him: Mark, Sonia, and Kaio. These 3 people, Henry said, to the more than 1,000 employees gathered in the auditorium, taught me more about leadership, empathy, and humanity than all the management books I've ever read. They didn't know who I was. They had nothing to gain by being kind to me. But they were. Because they were genuinely good people. He turned to them. Mark, thank you for letting me tend the garden when it would have been easier to throw me out. Sonia, thank you for the cookies you used to leave hidden every week, thinking I didn't know it was you. Kaio, thank you for teaching me that knowledge is only valuable when it's shared. The 3 of them were crying. The entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding. And when the noise finally subsided, Henry said one last thing. I spent 6 months invisible. 6 months being treated as less than nothing by most people, and I learned that we only discover who we really are when no one important is looking. That the true measure of a person isn't how they treat those above them, but how they treat those below them. And that a company, in the end, isn't made of products or services or numbers. It's made of people, and if we don't take care of them, we have nothing. The audience erupted in applause again, and there, on that stage, Henry felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, connection, life. He had returned. Not as the distant, lost CEO who had left, but as someone who finally understood that leading isn't about being at the top. It's about being together. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to the channel. Here we don't just tell stories. It's a space where real people share their pain and see the pain they don't feel. Subscribe every week. I want to continue this work, and I promise that every week I will bring you a story that will make you think, read, listen, and above all, feel that I understand you. And before you go, do me a favor, write one word in the comments, just one, that summarizes what you felt when you heard this story. It can be hope, strength, transformation. It doesn't matter what the word is because each comment is shared and sent to a chain of friends who are interested in it. Write, "This story moved me," if you felt something. Thank you so much for following me so far. It means much more than we imagined. Like if you enjoyed this story, and see you soon, I hope so.